Welcome, everybody. We are now up to 42 people, which looks good. And I'm President Annette Herlihy. And thank you so much to Raymond. Of course, he's been zooming us along and he's in charge of working with the speakers, which has been great. And of course, by law, you may remember our annual general meeting every November. We're doing it tonight. It won't take too long, but we still have to do it by law. And Sandy has been sending out ballots and setting it all up. So we can actually turn it over to Sandy now and see what she's got. Sandy?
Okay, thanks, Annette. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we have to do this, as Annette said, should have been the meeting we had last November. So it's actually the annual general meeting for 2020. So the things we really have to cover were the 4 things that I sent out by email or snail mail. So we have to go through all those motions. So the first one was the minutes of 2019 AGM, which were sent out, as I said, by email or snail mail. And we had a motion from myself to accept those minutes, and it was seconded by Linda Engel. And everybody who voted agreed that we would accept that motion. So I want to thank everybody who did vote. We had about 61 votes come in, either through snail mail or email. A good, really great response from the snail mail people, most of whom are probably not on tonight. But overall, I think our response rate was 25%. So everybody was in agreement, no abstentions, no declining. So that was the minutes of 2019. The second item is the financial report for 2020. You all received that. It was actually in the January newsletter, and then I made a slight correction and I sent it out by email and snail mail to everybody. Before we go on to, I just wonder, are there any questions for Sarah? Sarah's prepared to entertain questions if anybody has any. If you have a question, unmute your microphone. Okay, I gather no questions. So Sarah moved that we accept her financial report for 2020. The motion was seconded by Thava. And as again, all votes that were received were in favor of accepting the financial report. The third motion was to appoint the reviewers for 2021. And that's going to be Ian Campbell and Alex Semaniak again. The motion was made by Heather Wilson and seconded by Janet Nixon. Again, all the votes received were in favor of the motion. No negative or abstentions. And the last motion was the election of our officers and directors for the current year. I did not get any more nominations from the floor. I'm presuming there are no more nominations. So the nominations were to accept the slate. The motion was to accept the slate of candidates as follows: Annette Herlihy for president, Lynn Forbes as vice president, Sarah Walker as treasurer, myself as secretary, and the directors would be Mary Anderson, Deb Clokey, Lucia Herwig, Lee McLeod, Patsy Roche, Irene Sedgwick, and Thava Verathea. The motion was made by Ed Shepard, and it has been seconded by Jake Doler. And again, everybody was in agreement with that motion. So the only other item we have of business on the AGM is if there is any other business, if there's any particular issues anyone would like to bring forward at this particular time. So again, if you have anything you want to say or bring forward, please unmute your microphone. Nothing? Okay, then we need a motion to close the AGM. Can someone unmute their microphone and make that motion? Anybody?
I make the motion to.
Who's that? Sorry, who?
Mary.
Mary, and a seconder?
I second it.
Okay, thanks, David. Mary and second. And that concludes our AGM. There you go. Back to Annette for.
Well, we thought.
Sorry, you're muted. Don't hear you. You're muted.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, we figured it might take forever, and here it took less than 5 minutes, so we can't complain. And I guess we're ready to go on to our speaker, Ron Brown. And again, Raymond has set it up so that he'll do the slide part, and Ron will probably do all the speaking. So, do you want to go ahead and we can listen to his wonderful presentation?
Ron, if you could unmute your mic and just say a few things, that way people can get a chance to see you.
Okie dokie, I am unmuted. I hope it's on video.
Do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Introduction to myself. Well, I am, I guess, a travel writer. 20 books. Past chair of the Writers Union of Canada. And I have a wife here, my home in East York, and 2 grown daughters and 1 grandchild. So, and I've been fortunate enough, I guess, like I said, to do quite a number of books. Most of them are travel related and orient people towards the, I guess, a travel writer. Not just in Ontario, but across Canada as well. I'm an enthusiast of ghost towns and real. As chair of the here, I look at something a bit different in East York, and 2 grown up and have been fortunate enough to get people towards the one Canada as well. I'm an enthusiast of world wonders.
So you want to go ahead and present?
Sorry?
If you want, go ahead and present. I put your first slide up, and hang on, I'm just trying to give you permission to.
Okay, so I'm going to do the slides themselves then.
Yeah, I'm just going to.
Correct.
Hang on, I just got to find you on the list to give you. Okay, I've just passed control of the slides over to you.
Wonderful. So, Canada's World Wonders, what the heck are they anyway? Well, my publisher decided we should do a book about UNESCO world sites, biospheres, and heritage sites in Canada. But we expanded it beyond that to sites and places that resonate outside of Canada regardless of the UNESCO designation. Long Point World Biosphere Reserve down on Lake Erie was one of the first to be registered. That's how you do a UNESCO site, you register it in Ontario. And it's a remarkable site down there. Okay, we're not advancing here, Raymond, for some reason. There we go. We got her. I think there's a bit of a delay. Anyway, it's been so designated because of its remarkable variety of wetlands, flora, fauna, and so on. And it extends 33 kilometers out into the middle of Rice Lake. It's quite something to see. Well, another early designation in Canada was the Rocky Mountains. Now, Rocky Mountains is one of our earliest national parks, and it was created as a national park thanks to the CPR, who built their railway through the passes of the Rocky Mountains. Still trying to get this to advance, Raymond.
Okay, then you let me know when you want to advance, and I'll advance it from here.
Okay, advance it, please. So the railways were the reason for having the Rocky Mountains designated as Canada's first national park. Next, please. And next, please. And the reason for that was the CPR wanted to draw tourists to the region. They didn't want to just protect the scenery or the landscape. They wanted to promote it and exploit it for their tourism. Here we see the Banff Springs Hotel. Next, please. And no wonder, because the view from the Banff Springs Hotel was quite remarkable. So the Rocky Mountains have become lately a designated UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. Next, please. And the reasons for that are quite obvious. It has a remarkable collection of of glaciers and ice fields, such as the Athabasca Glacier. You see here north of Jasper, please. And Lake Louise, too, is spectacular for its scenery. In the background, you can see one of the glaciers flowing into that lake. It's all part of the Rocky Mountains National Park as well as the Biosphere Reserve. Next, please, Raymond. Now, Algonquin Park, it's not a national park. It's not a designated Biosphere Reserve, but it's one of the most popular parks in Canada, and a lot of folks come here just for the scenery. But now, even though this was created as a park in the 1890s, next please, it wasn't for the scenery or the recreation, it was for the logging industry. They needed a forest reserve so the logging companies could have at the woods. And here's an example of one of the relics from the logging days. This is called an alligator, and it's basically an amphibious craft that can go across water and across the land as well, towing logs as it goes. And this is located in the Logging Museum in Algonquin Park. Next, please, Raymond. Now, you look at the mountains in the distance, and you would say to yourself, well, these must have taken millions of years to create. These mountains were created in seconds, 200 million years ago, when a giant meteor, probably an asteroid, plunged into the Earth. And the mountains you see there, especially the high one in the middle, are what's called a nut thrust. And the whole Earth exploded upwards to create these mountains. The area is now a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. Next, please. And some of the unusual features associated with these mountains are what they call shatter cones, because the incredible heat and blast from the meteor created these unusual rock formations. I actually have one here at home. Next, please. Now, it's a biosphere reserve because of its natural features as well. It's just a bit northeast of Quebec City, and what we see here is Arctic tundra, just a few hundred kilometers northeast of Quebec City, and that's what makes it one of its the country's most unusual UNESCO World Biosphere Reserves. Next, please. Well, we do have a lot of unusual canyons and geological features as well. We have our own version of the Grand Canyon, Wilmette Canyon, up near Thunder Bay. And next, please. And one which you're probably not going to get to very, very soon, and that's called Boreal Canyon and Boreal Falls. Why aren't you likely to get to it? Because it's an Anticosti island in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And next, please. And another one you're probably not going to be too likely to get to either is this one. Some of you will recognize it, Victoria Falls in the Nahanni River area. It's the Nahanni area is again a UNESCO heritage site, and with places like Dead Man's Gully and so on and so forth. It's got an interesting background to it. And next, please. Now, some of you may be more familiar with these areas here, and that's the Niagara Escarpment. It too is a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve, largely because of its many rock formations. And next, please. And its waterfalls as well. It's got hundreds of waterfalls flowing along over its crests. Next, please. And the largest, of course, is the Niagara Falls itself. One of the first places to get international recognition when Father Louis Hennepin visited in 1688. Next, please. But the Niagara Escarpment is also well known for its wonderful lookout points. This is Rattlesnake Point, where rock climbing certainly takes place. And next, please. But it does have its secrets as well. In an area called the Silent Valley, we find the ruins of a small aircraft which crashed 30 years ago while trying to navigate through a severe thunderstorm on its way in the Owen Sound area. And it's off the Bruce Trail, a little hard to find, but it's one of the Niagara Escarpment's many secrets. Okay, next, please. Well, Canada is also known for its dinosaurs. And This one may or may not be real. I'm not quite sure. And next, please. Now, some of them we can identify, but some of them might not be quite so identifiable. And I'll leave you to wonder. Canada is also known for this Royal Tyrrell Museum of dinosaur bones, for sure. It's got a remarkable collection, one of most recent of which was found up in the Northwest Territories with its skin still on it, and that's quite stunning. Next, please. Well, Canada is also famous for its like I said, Badlands. And the Dinosaur Provincial Park near Drumheller is, again, a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of all the dinosaur bones that are found there. And there's one just noted in the paper the other day. A 12-year-old boy found an unusual and fairly new species of dinosaur. Next, please. Well, Canada is also noted for its Great Lakes, the largest bodies of fresh water in the world. And Lake Superior is the largest, and it was also a popular route for First Nations travelers. And you can still go to that site today and find the Agawa rock paintings. Next, please. There we go. And so they're, I guess, not a UNESCO site, but certainly a part of the legacy of our Great Lakes. Next, please. And one of the legacies of the Great Lakes, of course, is the attraction they had for the group of 7 painters. Here is Pick Island in Lake Superior, painted by Lorne Harris. Next, please. Well, the Great Lakes are not the only lakes of renown outside of Canada. We also have the Muskoka Lakes, which have become quite popular with Hollywood celebrities, Goldie Hawn, Tom Hanks, and so on, and known to have accommodation there. Next, please. And one of my favorite areas is actually the 30,000 Islands in Georgian Bay. Again, another UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. That's quite amazing. And the 30,000 Islands has a few secrets as well. Next, please. And one of those secrets is it's a legacy of ghost towns. Depot Harbor was built as a grain port just near Parry Sound. It grew to have 110 houses, grain elevators, railway terminals, and so on. Next, please. Unfortunately, however, during the Second World War, its grain elevators were storing cordite, which caught fire and exploded into a midnight fireball that could be seen on the streets of Parry Sound more than 10 kilometers away. Next, please. And if you go to Depot Harbor today, all you're going to find is the ruins of the churches and the foundations of 110 houses. It is one of the largest ghost towns we have. Next, please. Another island cluster, which is quite attractive, is the Thousand Islands. Now, this is part of a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve called the Frontenac Arch, and it's where a ridge of Canadian Shield rocks kind of arch upward across the St. Lawrence River and create this maze of islands and waterways. Next, please. And it's little wonder that it became popular with rich Americans like George Bolt, owner of the Astoria, Waldorf Astoria in New York, and this famous Bolt Castle, which I'm sure many of us have been to. Okay, next, please. And of course, Thousand Islands doesn't necessarily always have large and monumental mansions. It has a few more modest dwellings as well. Next, please. Now we're going to go to the West Coast and visit the what's called the Amazon North. It's the Great Bear Rainforest. It's one of the largest untouched moderate rainforest, temperate rainforest, I should say, in the world, and it extends up the coast of British Columbia. Next, please. And it's also the reserve for what's called the Kermode bear, kind of a white bear. It's a mutation, not a polar bear or anything like that. Next, please. And we're going to go back to the East Coast now and visit the Bay of Fundy, which has the world's largest or highest tides. And where you see it now is low tide, and at high tide, It goes up to the level of those trees you see on the rock in the middle, the world's largest or highest tides. Next, please. And another unusual type of formation, some of you may know it. If this was a live audience, I'd ask you to identify them. You would probably know them as pingos. You find them in the high Arctic, in areas of permafrost, where lakes underneath the soil are frozen. And when they freeze, they, like an ice cube, expands in the middle. They push upwards to create this unusual, strange feature. There's actually a Pingo National Landmark created by the government to protect them from devastation and so on. Next, please. And another feature of the high Arctic, of course, is what's called the Inuksuits. And these are created in different shapes and forms, basically to guide Inuit travelers. And some of the Inuksuits are designed in such a way as to warn of danger, to advise where the next village is, and so on. This is actually in Toronto, but it was built by an Inuit person to celebrate World Youth Day a number of years ago. Next, please. Now we'll migrate back to the West Coast, and a symbol for the West Coast First Nations, of course, is the totem pole. Next, please. And totem pole really is like a family tree. They're built upwards. They use red cedar, which is a very durable wood. And basically, they tell the story of the family generation back to the time of the ancestors. And next, please. Probably the most famous of them all is the Gwaii Hanass, or the Haida Gwaii totems, on what used to be called the Queen Charlotte Islands. And these are very early on designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because they're so unusual that they're still around. And of course, smallpox decimated the population, so there's really very few First Nations people living there now. And next, please. But the world's best collection of totems is in the Royal Victoria Museum. There's over 40 of them, and they've been gathered from different villages up and down the coast. Some of them go back 150 years old, and they were all created by First Nations carvers. Okay, next, please. Now we're going to go to the prairies, and the Prairie First Nations people relied heavily on the buffalo. The buffalo provided them with meat, with clothing, and their bones were used for utensils, and their fat was used for heating. Next, please. Unfortunately, when the West was opened by the railway lines, the buffalo were hunted to near extinction. And here we see a pile of buffalo bones waiting to be shipped out to be crushed for fertilizer. Next, please. And what the First Nations people would do is they would herd the buffalo over these high cliffs known as buffalo jumps. Mostly in southwestern Alberta. This is known as the head smashed in buffalo jump. And the tribesmen would get up behind the buffalo who were grazing on top of the cliffs and force them to plunge over the cliffs, and then they would be harvested below. It's called head smashed in, not because the buffalo's head got smashed in, but because one young lad decided he would wait down below and watch the buffalo come over. And unfortunately, his head got smashed in, which is unfortunate. Okay, next, please. Well, Canada is noted for its diverse population, and Toronto has got one of the largest Chinatowns outside of China, and a lot of these immigrants have come in relatively recent years. Next, please. But from some of the earliest arrivals, namely the Irish in the 1840s, 1820s too, had to stop and quarantine themselves at an island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. It's called Grosse Ile. Next, please. Where many of them would be have to recover or possibly die in the hospitals on the island. Now, Grosse Ile, there's 40-odd buildings there which date from those days, the oldest of which is the old hospital. Now, how would you like to be quarantined in this place? Not too pleasant. Well, like I say, it's a national park now, and people go there and visit. Next, please. But when you do, you have to go through a recreation of the quarantine process, where a nurse comes by and takes your temperature and looks inside your mouth. Aren't we familiar with something like that these days, eh? Anyway, but But this didn't last too long. It was good for sailing ships. But when larger ocean liners started carrying people to this country, next please, Grosse Ile was too small, and Pier 21 was created on the Halifax waterfront in the 1930s, and people from Europe mostly would arrive there, go through their customs, their immigration, and their health checks. Next, please. Now, during the war, Pier 21 was a staging point for destroyers who escorted the merchant marine across the Atlantic to the war in Europe. And my dad was on one of these destroyers, and he survived the war, but it was a pretty harrowing experience, from what I've told. Next, please. Well, new arrivals bring really interesting elements to our urban landscapes. Here's the Daps Mandir Hindu temple in North Etobicoke. Probably some of you have been there and maybe even toured inside. But architectural wonders go back many years as well. Next, please. Such as Quebec City. It's the only walled city in North America, north of Mexico City, which I'm told is walled. I've never been there. And it too is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Next, please. Because some of its buildings date way back to the 1640s and 1650s. For my money, I think that's a little bit too much of a tourist site. Next, please. However, this next place is Fortress Louisbourg. Now, this was a recreation, actually, of a French fortress. Now, a fortress is different from a fort. A fortress is a militarized city. So this was actually a city built by the French in the 1730s, part of their war with England for the ownership of the east coast of Canada. Next, please. In 1967, Parks Canada undertook to recreate Fortress Louisbourg almost exactly as it was, with the buildings looking as they did. Next, please. And reenactors dressing up and playing the role. And here's some poor fella, some poor prisoner tied to the pole in the town. And on to the next one, please. Now, one which is, I don't think, too overwhelmed with tourists, but it could be, is Lunenburg. Lunenburg, again, is a World Heritage Site because of the remarkable conditions and layout of what they called an English colonial town on the east coast of North America. Next, please. And it's also home to the very famous Bluenose schooner. It became famous being one of the fastest schooners in the world during the 1920s and 30s. It was fast not because it was a racing craft, but because it was a fishing boat. And the idea for speed was to get the fish catch back to the docks to be sold before anybody else got there. The original Bluenose sank off of Haiti in 1938 and was rebuilt using some of the very same craftsmen who built the original. So now this is the Bluenose 2, of course. And so next, please. Okay, next. Now, another historic street doesn't have any special designation, and it should, is St. Andrews by the Sea in New Brunswick. Again, here we see a remarkable collection of beautifully preserved early 18th century buildings. Next, please. Now, these buildings are preserved as well, but they're a ghost town. This is the largest and best preserved ghost town in Canada, Malge-Albert, and it's well to the north of Quebec City. 66 buildings have been preserved from the days of 1904 to 1929 when it was a pulp mill town. Next, please. Now, this too is an early unusual village. It's called a Burlamac, and it's in the Val d'Or region of Quebec. It's a mining community. All the homes were built of log, more than 2 dozen of them, all built of log, and they're all still occupied. Next, please. Well, Cobalt is another unusual boom town, a mining town. It boomed in 1903 when silver was discovered here. By 1910, there were 200 mines in operation. By 1930, a population of 20,000. By 1930, the population was down around 700, and there were only 2 mines in operation. So Cobalt is it's like it's a National Historic Site now. Next, please. Well, one of the most famous of our mining and boom towns, of course, is Dawson City, up in the Yukon, the site of the great Klondike Gold Rush, where in 1896 and 97, 100,000 gold seekers set out from the west coasts of Canada and the US. Due to the difficult way of getting there, only 10,000 arrived, and ultimately most of them found there was no gold there. So they milled around for a while and went home, leaving only 1,000 behind. Next, please. Which is pretty much why Dawson City became pretty much of a ghost town. Many of its boomtown buildings are still hung around. And Parks Canada has designated as a National Historic Site and have preserved many of those old boomtown buildings. And next, please. Well, not so well preserved is another boomtown on the way to the Klondike, and that was Bennett Lake. It was kind of a stopover place for the miners, but a town grew up here, and most of the buildings, the few that are left, just sitting empty. Next, please. Now, if you really wanted to go follow the route of the Klondikers, the Chilkoot Pass has been reopened by Parks Canada and the U.S. National Park Service, and you can follow the trail that the miners, the prospectors took to get there usually from Skagway, Alaska, up to Dawson City. And not too many people are allowed to go at any one time, and little cabins are built along the trail to give you shelter for staying overnight. And next, please. But I think these days most people would rather just go there by train. The White Pass and Yukon Railway still operates out of Skagway up to the Canadian border. It's a very scenic route and a nice way to go. Next, please. But I think a more genuine ghost town we find in British Columbia. It's called Barkerville, and it was the site of the Cariboo Gold Rush starting from the 1850s, late 1850s. And it was still producing gold into the 1930s and finally became a ghost town, and the government of BC has preserved it as a ghost town park. Now, just taking a drink of water there. Next, please. Now, let's go from yellow gold to black gold. And that's the site of the world's first commercial oil well. And it's in Oil Springs, Ontario. And believe it or not, it still uses, to this day, the old system known as jerker rods, which you see here, to bring the oil up out of the small deposits in the ground. It's on its way to becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And next, please. As you travel the roads in the area, you'll find dioramas which depict the way oil was extracted in the days of peak operation. Now, those particular devices aren't there anymore, but the jerker rods actually still are. And next, please. Now we'll go to a little bit of a more tragic tale of Canada's high Arctic. Now, explorers have been looking for the Northwest Passage in the late 1500s. And it was unfortunate that the Franklin expedition set out with high hopes, 2 ships, 200 sailors, and never made it back. This was in the 1840s. More than 15, I think, expeditions were sent searching for them, and nobody ever found them. Lately, the ships have been found off the west coast of King William Island. They shouldn't have been there, but they were there. Next, please. Because many sailors just didn't make it. In fact, the entire crew died somewhere. And here we see the 4 graves on Beechey Island, which was one of the places where the failed expedition tried to pass. And next, please. And they tried to pass on the wrong side of King William Island because the real Northwest Passage was a small channel down the other side of King William Island, which was finally discovered in 1904 by Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer. And he overwintered here at a place called Joe Haven and made his way through to the Bering Sea, the Beaufort Sea, the following year. And finally, the Northwest Passage had been revealed. Next, please. It might be a little easier traveling if you wanted to use a canal. And the Rideau Canal and Kingston fortifications are another one of our UNESCO World Heritage Site. Next, please. Many of the locks are still operated by hand, and some of the more stunning historic operations are at Jones Falls, where it's triple locks, and at the time, the world's highest stone arch dam. Next, please. And of course, the Rideau Canal makes its way down to Kingston, where the Kingston fortifications are also part of the World Heritage Site. This is known as a Martello Tower. Well, the Rideau Canal was considered an engineering marvel in its time. Next, please. But as the railways came along, they created engineering marvels of their own, such as railway trestles, which made their way across daunting canyons and gullies. Next, please. And many of them are actually still in operation to this very day. Next, please. One of the largest of its kind in North America is the Old Man Trestle, which we find just west of Lethbridge, Alberta. It's still in use to this very day. Next, please. And another example of a one-of-a-kind is the longest cantilever railway bridge in North America, and that's the bridge which crosses the St. Lawrence River into Quebec City. And next, please. Well, it wasn't just bridges that were an engineering marvel for the railways, it was tunnels as well. Now, we're all familiar with the spiral tunnels, or at least we've heard of them. These are the Wilmette Canyon tunnels near Hope, British Columbia. And it was where the Kettle Valley Railway had to blast their way through, create 4 tunnels through these steep granite rocks. And so difficult was it to do this work that the workers actually had to be lowered down the sides in baskets to do the drilling and blasting. It's a part of a rail trail now, and it's quite stunning to see. Next, please. Well, Canada has a reputation for having some of the world's finest railway journeys. And one of my favorites, and I think a lot of people may have done it, is the Canadian. Here we see the Canadian at Portage la Prairie. And it began operation as a CP train in 1956, thanks to successive government of its trackage now, but still considered one of the world's finest train rides. Next, please. A relative newcomer on the scene, of course, is the Rocky Mountaineer. Now, it's not a normal train service. It doesn't sort of service local populations, but it's a luxury train ride, like a cruise ship on rails, really, without the COVID. And here we see the Rocky Mountaineer making its way through the Rockies. Next, please. But I think a railway journey that many of us have been on, not quite as luxurious, but it's the Agawa Canyon Tour Train. It's run by the CNR, who's been trying to get rid of it lately. But to their credit, they have been fixing up some of the coaches. Next, please. And many of the coaches actually have video screens where you can sit and watch from the engine, like the video camera is up at the front of the engine, and you can watch the progress as the train rolls along up to one of the world's loveliest canyons. Next, please. And there are some forgotten train trips across Canada as well. One of them is the Skeena, which goes from Jasper, Alberta to Prince Rupert, BC, again through some lovely scenery, and it's a day train. So you can travel during the day to Prince George, stay overnight, and then board the train again for the rest of the journey. Next, please. One that you've probably never heard of is the Petite Train de Charlevoix. And that's a small tourist train that runs along the Gulf of the St. Lawrence River. Beautiful scenery, mountains on one side, water on the other, from Montmorency Falls, just from downstream from Quebec, to Bay St. Paul. Beautiful little train ride. Next, please. And we also have our fair share of unusual trains. These are twin trains which make their way up into northern Quebec from Montreal. One is called the Abitibi, and the other is called the Saguenay. They come out of Montreal, join together. They split here at Hervey Junction, and one goes to the northwest, one goes to the northeast. They travel all day, visiting places in northern Quebec that don't have any road access. So it's quite a fun train ride. You see all kinds of people on board those trains. It's quite a lot of fun. Next, please. Well, we do have a fair number of steam excursions as well, taking us back to the good old days of coal smoke and whatnot. Prairie Dog Central is one of the better known ones, running northwest, I should say, of Winnipeg. Next, please. And closer to home, of course, we have the famous South Simcoe Railway, which runs a lengthy 8 kilometers between Tottenham and Beaton. There's a story there I could tell you sometime, using some of the oldest operating steam locomotives in the country. And next, please. Well, the railway engineering just didn't confine itself to the tracks and the trains. The railways created some of the world's most magnificent railway stations, basically in the world. And here we see the Gare du Palais in Quebec City, which is was designed to complement, of course, the Chateau Frontenac, beautifully restored inside as well. Next, please. A lot of people may not be so familiar with the McAdams Station, a CPR station right in the middle of New Brunswick. McAdams got fewer than 5,000 people. Well, why have a station this big? Well, this was for kind of wealthier train travelers who were making their way to the Algonquin Inn in St. Andrews by the Sea. Now, the upstairs of this particular station is all hotel, a luxury hotel. Downstairs is dining rooms and lunch counters, a hotel lobby, and a jail, and a customs house. And next, please. And like I say, they would board there to transfer onto trains to take them down to the Algonquin Inn at St. Andrews by the Sea. Another beautiful railway hotel. Okay, next, please. Well, of course, the auto age came along, and many Canadians wanted to cross the country by car, starting in 1912, when a group of car enthusiasts in Tofino, British Columbia, decided to lobby for a Canadian highway. Next, please. And as part of their lobbying process, they offered to offer a medal to the first person who could cross the country on all Canadian roads. This was Thomas Wilby. He tried it. He failed because we didn't have roads which crossed the country. He had to go partly by train, partly by boat. He finally made it to British Columbia, but he never got a medal. Next, please. Finally, in 1949, the government passed the Trans-Canada Highway Act and started to build what is the largest single named highway in the world, the Trans-Canada Highway. It finally opened in the mid-1960s. And next, please. And it's been considerably improved since then. And what we see here is a wildlife overpass. I guess the highway people got too tired of picking up dead deer and mangled moose on the highways, and so they created these overpasses to encourage animals to cross the highway safely. I don't think there's any crossing guards there, mind you. Next, please. Well, the Trans-Canada Highway is also well known for its roadside icons, and probably one of the most touching is the tribute to Terry Fox, who many years ago in the 1980s tried to cross Canada on his one leg to raise money for a cure for cancer. He did a marathon each and every day, starting in St. John's, Newfoundland. He only made it as far as Thunder Bay when cancer took over his body, and he died the following year. Next, please. Well, we're all familiar, I think, those of us who've traveled in Northern Ontario, with the famous Wawa Goose. Well, the Wawa Goose pretty much represents the halfway point for the Trans-Canada Highway, and this is the third goose that used to be on the site. Next, please. And a newer icon is actually the Winnie the Pooh icon, located in the town of White River, a railway town where the original Little Bear cub, 1914, was purchased to become a mascot for the Canadian Army serving in warfront in Europe. And Winnie is, this is the Disney version, of course, but it's the hometown of Winnie the Pooh, and the good townsfolk of White River decided they would get rid of that thermometer that showed them as being the coldest spot ever in Canada, which they weren't, and replace it with something a little bit more uplifting. And so we have Winnie. Next, please. Well, Canada has been, Trans-Canada Highway is not especially a scenic highway. It's a very highway. It crosses the many landscapes and cities and countrysides of our country, but we do have a number of designated scenic highways. The Icefield Parkway, which runs from Jasper to Lake Louise, is certainly one of those, a beautiful, beautiful highway. Next, please. Another is in Quebec, and it's known as the Lighthouse Trail. It follows the south shore of the St. Lawrence River around the Gaspé Peninsula, passing more than a dozen preserved historic lighthouses. Next, please. And as it goes around the peninsula, we come into view of Percé, the town of Percé, and the famous Percé Rock. Next, please. Which is an unusual feature in its own. It doesn't have any special designation, really, but it's quite a stunning piece of rock just stuck out there in the ocean. Next, please. And here, too, we find Bonaventure Island, which is one of North America's largest bird nesting reserves. And next, please. And I think many of us are familiar with this particular view. It's promoted often on TV, and that's the famous Cabot Trail, which goes around the Cape Breton Highlands, one of the highest points of land in eastern Canada. And as it does, it passes not just remarkable scenery, but a variety of cultural sites as well. Next, please. Cultural sites which display, I'm not going to say who that is, you could guess, display the Gaelic culture of Cape Breton at a place called St. Anne's, where they actually teach the Gaelic language, kelp making, and Gaelic food. Next, please. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Highlands, we come to the French-speaking community of Cheticamp, the Acadians. And this museum is dedicated to what's called the Mi-Carême, which is kind of a festival during mid-Lent, where people kind of go from house to house wearing masks such as these and ask people to guess who they are, sort of like the mummers of Newfoundland that I think many of us are familiar with. Okay, next, please. So we do go to Newfoundland now and follow what's called the Viking Trail, which leads up the west coast of Newfoundland from Gros Morne National Park, again, a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve, for 400 kilometers up the west coast. Next, please. To the site of what they say is the earliest European settlement in North America, Lansom Meadows, which was apparently settled by the Vikings in the 10th century. And it too is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as well as a Parks Canada site as well. And next, please. Well, Canada's wildlife somehow have a bit of a reputation as well. Not all of Canada's wonders, world wonders, actually sit still. Next, please. And Churchill has become known as the polar bear capital of the world, not just because of the presence of these mighty beasts, but because they've developed ways using polar bear to get out naturally see the Churchill. Depends largely now for its tourist revenue and people that travel by train to come up and see these massive beasts. Next, please. Now, the polar bears are not the only white phenomenon in Canada. We have a population of white moose rambling through the woods up north of Timmins. Not a large population are albino moose. Next, please. Now, another white species is the white squirrel down in Exeter, Ontario. Now, the white squirrel is not an albino. You can see by the black eyes. It's actually a genetic mutation of the gray squirrel. And Exeter is one of the very few places, and probably the largest place, to have a population of white squirrels. There's a few others around, but not very many. Next, please. Now, that guy is kind of fuzzy and cute. This guy is not so fuzzy and cute. This is Canada's biggest snake, making its way down a tree. This is called the Eastern Gray Rat Snake. They can grow up to 9 feet long, 3 meters long, folks, and one was supposedly killed that was much longer than that. They have this disconcerting habit of dangling from trees. So if you're walking through a trail in Frontenac Provincial Park, for example, you may encounter one of these guys kind of dangling, saying hello to you from a tree branch. And next, please. But one world wildlife wonder you're not too likely to see, of course, is our very own Bigfoot, or Sasquatch. There have been sightings about them. People have said they've been taken captive by them. People have been taken captive by UFOs too, I guess. But nobody's really produced a verifiable, documented sighting. No proof yet. Maybe they're out there. Who knows? Next, please. But I think one of the most significant moving of Canada's World Wonders is not even in Canada, although it's on Canadian soil. And that's, most of you will recognize, the Vimy Memorial in France. Standing on the top of Vimy Ridge, unveiled in 1936 by King Edward VIII. And it's a massive monument containing the names of thousands and thousands of Canadian troops that perished during that, what I consider, unnecessary conflict. And historians will probably tell you the same thing. Next, please. And this monument was so moving. Now, here's a story you might not want to hear too much. But during the Second World War, now, Adolf Hitler was fond of bombing Allied monuments and so on. But when he saw this one, a visit to France, he thought he was so touched by it that he thought, well, maybe we won't destroy this one. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that guy. So that pretty much wraps up our show for this evening. And next, please. And as we make our way into the setting sun, next, please. I hope you've enjoyed this particular ride to visit Canada's World Wonders. And the final slide, please. And thank you very much. And anybody has any questions, I would be delighted to try and answer them, maybe even make up an answer. I'm not quite sure, depending on what your question is. Well done.
People have questions. They just want to unmute their system and ask their question, please. Thanks.
Hi, it's me, Sandy. What were those things called, bingos or dingoes or something, that were in the high Arctic?
Yeah, pingos, P-I-N-G-O. It rhymes with bingo, starts with a P.
P, okay.
Yeah.
Never seen them before.
Yeah, and they only exist where there's permafrost, and of course, because of global warming, the permafrost is melting.
Thank
So
you.
there's actually hundreds of them up there. Hundreds of them. Okay.
Any more questions? Because, you know, it was just surprising how many world wonders we have.
Everybody.
I've got one. Just to finish up here. You mentioned the Queen Charlotte Islands. I was there decades ago, and you said it used to be called the Queen Charlotte Islands. Why did they change the name?
I guess to respect the traditional name of the First Nations people there. Queen Charlotte is, you know, basically a British royal, and the people on the residents of the Haida Gwaii felt that it was appropriate to return to the original name. I think the lady needs one. There we go.
Lee, you gotta unmute yourself.
Lee?
Yeah, Lee was trying to talk, but she's
Lee,
unmuted.
unmute yourself, Lee.
I can't do it.
Now you were just okay a minute ago. Now you are okay.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Ron, you mentioned a place in Quebec called Al Shabir, I think.
Val Jalbert. Val Jalbert, J-A-L-B-E-R-T.
J-A-L.
Something near Jonquière. B-E-R-T.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's near Jonquière.
Near Jean-Pierre. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's known as a ghost town. It's a paper mill.
It's a ghost town park. There are 66 houses there. It became a ghost town in 1929. Because of its popularity with photographers, the Quebec government created a ghost provincial park around it, and there's camping there as well now.
Okay. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Okay.
I could tell you a little story about Lewisburg, if you have a couple of minutes. My husband is an archaeologist, and he worked at Lewisburg for 2.5, almost 3 years. And they never finished the second wing of Lewisburg. So when they were reconstructing it, they decided that they would build the second wing identical to the first wing, of course. And they had the plans for the first wing. So they built the second wing. And somebody went to the archives in Paris, France, and found the actual plans for Lewisburg. And the second wing was not identical to the first one. It was totally different, apparently. But the Canadian government went ahead anyway, and it's still there. And it is a lovely tourist site.
So it's kind of like a Disneyland then.
Yeah, definitely. But they recovered a lot of artifacts from various middens or garbage heaps in the fortress, like buttons on uniforms and pottery that they used, but maybe it's broken and they threw it away. Parts of uniforms. But the folly of the French was building Louisbourg over that bay that you saw. And when the English came up the St. Lawrence River, they just marched inland in the other direction, and of course won the battle, as it were, because Louisbourg wasn't built to be defended from the land side, it was from the ocean side. But an interesting part of history, and it's really worth a visit.
Well, apparently the reconstructed portion only represents 20% of the entire Louisbourg town site.
Right. They ran out of funds, apparently. But there were miners out of work at Sydney, and the Spring Hill disaster as well. And I think it was Trudeau at the time said we need to find employment for these men who are suddenly out of work. So they decided to go ahead and build Louisbourg, which turned out to be a good idea.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
For those, Ron, you've written quite a few books. Would you maybe like to let people know where they can and how they can buy them?
Well, obviously at the moment, you can't go into bookstores, but you can phone the bookstore or order it online and visit the front of the store. Now, I've done that with Book City on the Danforth. I've purchased a book there, but I purchased it through the front door. We've done the same with the chapters on Bay Street. So it's possible to do it. You could probably get it from the publisher as well. So we've got Canada's World Wonders. We do have a new version of Top 160 Unusual Things to See in Ontario. Came out just last year. And we're doing a new version of Ontario's Ghost Towns. And I just looked at the final proofs today. So we should be seeing that in a few months. And that's published by Firefly. And again, you'll probably hear about that or see it in bookstores or on Amazon, that kind of thing.
Oh, good, because the ghost towns is something nobody knows too much about. And I'm surprised how many there are actually. So that
there's actually quite a few.
Yes.
There's a good number of ghost town websites out there now too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that sounds good.
Can I ask a question? Oh, okay.
Sure. Go ahead. Was that you, Linda? Oh, no, Linda, you're muted.
Okay, sorry.
There you are.
Okay, all right, sorry. I okay now?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to ask about the totem poles. You said the biggest collection was in the museum in Victoria, and I was wondering whether there was any movement to repatriate those to either Haida Gwaii or the original place that they were taken from. There seems to be a movement to repatriate some of the Indigenous artifacts that had been taken by museum staff. And I wondered if there's anything being done about that one.
Well, the Royal Victoria Museum, the Royal Museum in Victoria, is actually partly run by First Nations people. Okay, so they are responsible for the totems which are there. But you're quite right, there are many movements afoot, and I agree with them, where First Nations artifacts are being returned to their place of origin. So yes, you're quite right. Some of them probably will go back, but like I say, First Nations people are responsible for the totem collection in Victoria.
Good, thank you.
Don't hesitate to ask. We have the time.
Well, here's another look at the book itself. I know we showed it at the beginning of the presentation, but that's what it looks like. Maybe everybody's gone off to watch the hockey game.
No, we still have 40 people left.
Oh, good.
Anybody else or? No, nothing?
Ron, it's Ian Campbell. I'm surprised that, oh, I'm sorry, you're getting an echo. Just mute yourself.
Just turn your speakers down a bit, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, this isn't working. I will go to another room. I'm surprised in addressing this group that you have not addressed any gardens in Canada.
Have you come across gardens?
I think I got part of that. There was a bit of well, there are many wonderful gardens, of course. Yeah, I didn't include them because I didn't think myself to be an expert in gardens like you folks are experts. I would defer to you. I've seen beautiful gardens. There's one along the south shore of the St. Lawrence in Quebec. I just forget the name of it offhand. It's along that trail, the Lighthouse Trail. And it is mentioned in my book, by the way, the garden that I'm thinking of. I can't remember the name of it just off the top of my head, but that is one that is in the book. The Butchart Gardens in British Columbia, I haven't mentioned in the book, but this particular set of gardens, along with a mansion, by the way, that's on the Lighthouse Trail in Quebec, it is mentioned in my book. And it's not in my slide presentation.
Maybe it could be a future project for you.
That'd be a future project for you. How about that? My wife does the gardening.
She'll have to write one.
Yeah, there's an idea. She'd love to. Or not.
Well, it's a lot of work. It looks easy enough, but it's a lot of traveling around and taking notes and finally come up.
Well, that's the part of it that I enjoy most, just getting out, traveling around, taking the pictures, and just seeing the countryside. That's the fun part.
Do you plan
the difficult part is going back and forth with your editor.
Yes. Oh, I see. Do you plan to do any more big time trips?
Well, we just finished doing a book called Toronto's Lost Villages.
Right. Oh.
That came out last year. It was a revision of an earlier one. but it's quite new as well. And it's in good bookstores everywhere. And what it talks about is sort of, well, the number of places in Scarborough too. The old railway village down that used to be down at Port Union, for example, is in there. West Hill is in there. Places that used to be, you know, significant little villages in rural Scarborough before it got overwhelmed by urban growth.
How many books have you written altogether?
22.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That should keep us busy for a while.
Yes, it should.
Ron, your book on Scarborough Villages, did you talk about the bomb making factory that used to exist at Eglinton and I think it was Warden area?
I didn't mention that in the book. It was more of a munitions complex than it was a village. There's a great book out there. Barbara Franklin or Francis or something wrote a book called The Bomb Girls. And if anybody's really interested in that particular aspect of Scarborough's history, you get that book out of the library. It's called The Bomb Girls. And in fact, there was a documentary on CBC on that very subject. And we did a walking tour there 3 years ago. And the leader of the tour showed us some tunnels. We went through some tunnels which still exist under the ground in this particular munitions area. I would say a good portion of it has now been replaced by more modern structures, but you can still see some of the old wartime structures in that area too. And that's it's at Warden and Eglinton, kind of in the southeast area of that intersection. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's a very interesting story there.
Any more questions?
Well, I suspect some of the people that tuned in are have seen a lot of these places as well. You know, some of the Jasper, Banff, those areas. I'm sure they've been to them, which is wonderful. And I hope I've brought to light some which they may not have even heard of. And hopefully we'll all have a chance to get back out and see some of them in the not too distant future.
Well, you covered a lot of territory in this, what is it, hour and a half almost. And certainly a lot of surprises. Some places we know, we've been to, others haven't even heard of before. Maybe Canada should do more advertising and could make a lot more money on tourism.
Well, if I can present a bit of advocacy here, a lot of our newspapers, like the Toronto Star, have stopped using Canadian travel writers to promote Canadian destinations. They get a lot of their stuff off the wire, and a lot of it is destinations outside of Canada. Nothing wrong with that, but I think we need to pay more attention to our own travel industry and travel destinations, and our newspapers, I think, would go a long way to help with that.
And maybe, you know, probably once everything gets back to normal, get, you know, more foreign tourists who usually a lot of times know more about it than we do.
Economy for sure.
So any more or?
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself here.
There you are. No, you're back. No, unmute again.
Okay.
There you are.
Okay. I wanted to ask Ron if he had a favorite place in all of his travels.
Oh boy. That's a very good question. I like any place where I'm not sort of overwhelmed by traffic and suburban sprawl, that kind of thing. In Ontario, I would have to say my favorite place is the 30,000 Islands. We used to go camping there quite a lot. Lovely spot. And outside of Ontario, I love Saskatchewan. I love the Big Sky. I love the little prairie towns. And so I would say those are probably maybe my two favorite areas.
Okay.
A lot of
Thanks very
ghost
much.
towns in Saskatchewan.
Okay. Well, I've got to tell you that we have one of those big black or gray rat snakes resides in a tree on our property in the Frontenac Arts near North of Kingston. So they're quite a sight to see.
And they're pretty unusual to see too. I mean, whether you like snakes or not, I think you were lucky to be able to see one and identify one.
Well, they're completely harmless, even though they look lethal.
Yeah, they look pretty scary. That's for sure. Especially if they're
Thank you.
dangling from a tree in front of your face. Yeah.
Ron, can I ask you a question? It's Gail Doler here. You mentioned the prairies being one of your favorite destinations, but I didn't see many pictures of during your presentation of the Capel Valley, for example.
That's true. We did have a head smashed in buffalo jump. I think you would find a lot more of the prairies covered in a book which I wrote called Rails Across the Prairies, because the evolution of the modern day prairies really had a lot to do with the railways. And you have preserved stations, you have little ghost towns which depended on the railways. So that would be my focus on the prairies, is the railway heritage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any more? Think hard. Maybe a story you might remember once we're closing off. Sandy?
I think we can close off.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to add, or are you taking all the notes?
Yeah, no, I've got the notes.
You got it.
There's always the recording.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we'll close off. Thank you very much, Ron. Great to have you. Is there anything, Raymond, you have to?
Nope, that's it. As soon as you finish, I'll stop the recording and we'll upload it in a day or two.
And how long will the recording be available?
It'll be up there until somebody tells me to take it down. So if Ron wants to leave it up there forever, it's there. If he wants it only there for a couple of weeks, we'll take it down in a couple of weeks.
So are you putting it on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay.
How do we find it on YouTube?
I will send out a link to Sandy and she'll get it out to the membership.
Okay.
Yeah, I probably won't send it out till it'll be in the newsletter. Okay, it's always in the newsletter.
Right, yeah. Yeah, Sandy does a good job. Lots of information in her newsletter. Don't forget to read it. I'm always reminding people.
Unless actually I'll be sending out an email blast this week. So if it's uploaded, no, I'm gonna wait to the newsletter, because that way people who are on snail mail find the information too.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much. Great, so many of you listened in and watched, and we'll wait for what I would call the rerun on YouTube. And thank you again, Ron. It was great to listen to your talk. And we'll read Sandy's report. She does a great job on writing a big report for our newsletter. So is that it then? Shall we close off?
Might as well.
Okay. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Well,